Disneyland's defunct burning settlers cabin haunts me. During the 50 years of its existence, it went through countless iterations as Disney tried to scrub its image clean. This little cabin sat at the crossroads of America's perception of itself and some of the ugliest parts of the country's history, and that made it a ticking time bomb for such a family-friendly company. But removing the cabin has in some ways made Disneyland a lesser place, or at least a place that's uninterested in asking any questions that might have uncomfortable answers. The cabin is so tiny, how could it hold so many big ideas? To try and make sense of this literal trash fire, let's wind the clock back 245 years and travel 3,000 miles across the country to the town of Bethel in Maine. On August 3rd, 1781, the town of Bethel was attacked by a Native American raiding party. As white settlers encroached on their lands, disputes over land claims fueled anti-settler sentiments among indigenous people in the region. The area near Bethel was the home of the Androscoggin people. A chief named Tumtumhagen led 5 other men in a last-ditch attempt to assert their rights over the area, stealing from houses, taking 4 men captive, and killing 2 others. The raid didn't work. Through displacement, disease, and conflict, the Androscoggin people eventually died out. Much of their culture was lost, and any remaining descendants were absorbed into the broader Abenaki culture of the region. This small raid became known as the last Indian raid in New England. Since that day, the town of Bethel has celebrated the anniversary of the raid every 50 years. The 1931 celebrations started at 9 a.m. with a big parade featuring old costumes, vehicles, floats, freaks, etc., followed by a baseball game, a dinner of fried clams and hot dogs, and a greased pig to catch. The main event started at 1 p.m. Bethel's last Indian raid celebration had the town's teenagers dress as Native Americans and reenact the raid, complete with fake scalping, bound captives, and a large settler's cabin being set on fire. Local resident Margaret Joy Tibbets reminisced that burning the cabin may be historically inaccurate, but it was a grand climax. Even though no settlers' cabins were ever set on fire during the original raid in 1781, Bethel's celebration of the raid was not considered complete without one. The image of a humble log cabin on fire was a common trope in dime novels that romanticized the recent history of the American frontier. The trope was tied together with depictions of native people as bloodthirsty savages, burning homes to remind white settlers that this was still Indian land. Meanwhile, the destruction of their home was another obstacle for the settlers to overcome as they struggled to civilize the frontier. As pulp novels progressed into silent films, this stock scene carried over to westerns as the genre started to come into its own in the early 20th century.
To all who come to this happy place, welcome. Disneyland is your land. Here age relives fond memories of the past, and here youth may savor the challenge and promise of the future. Disneyland is dedicated to the ideals, the dreams, and the hard facts that have created America.
The first year after Disneyland's opening saw a multi-million-dollar expansion of the park. The iconic Skyway with its colourful buckets opened, as well as the Storybook Land canal boats and the Rainbow Caverns mine train. 1956 also saw the opening of Tom Sawyer Island. The area was based on the 1876 novel The Adventures of Tom Sawyer by American novelist Mark Twain. No, not that one. Yeah, that one. Set along the Mississippi River during the early 19th century, the novel and its sequels followed the adventures of plucky youth Tom Sawyer and his friend Huckleberry Finn. By the 1950s, the Sawyer-Huckleberry expanded universe was a popular and beloved children's franchise. Tom Sawyer Island sat in the middle of the rivers of America, in the Frontierland section of the park. Although it had locations from the Tom Sawyer books, like Injun Joe's Cave, the island was not entirely themed to Tom Sawyer in the way we might expect from a theme land at Disney these days. Before it was reworked and renamed to Harper's Cider Mill in the 1990s, the old mill was simply some yummy edutainment demonstrating water use by early pioneers, rather than a recreation of a specific location from the books. Another non-Tom Sawyer location was the island's main landmark, the imposing Fort Wilderness. This wooden stockade had blockhouses with toy rifles, military headquarters, a small graveyard, a secret escape tunnel, and bathrooms. The Tom Sawyer Island Explorer's map from 1957 states that the setting of Fort Wilderness is the year 1813, and mentions real historical figures like Davy Crockett and Major General Andrew Jackson. Like the rest of Frontierland, Tom Sawyer Island is a mixture of popular cultural references, historic facts, and mythic fancy. And just north of Fort Wilderness on the map is a small log cabin that has been set on fire. Even though it was on Tom Sawyer Island, the burning settler's cabin was not accessible, and I don't mean in the ADA way. To stop small children getting burnt to a crisp by an errant flame, Fort Wilderness was as far north as visitors could go on the island. The thematic reason for this is outlined in the souvenir map. You see, the top half of the island is Indian territory and terms of treaty prohibit entry. This northern section had the burning settler's cabin and a hostile Native American settlement, as well as other small pieces of scenery along the riverbanks. Instead of being accessible on foot, the burning settler's cabin was a prominent attraction for the Disneyland and Santa Fe Railroad, the Mike Fink keelboats, the Indian war canoes, and the Mark Twain riverboat. The Disneyland and Santa Fe Railroad circled the park, with a large section of the track running around the outside of the rivers of America. Between the trees, riders could see across the river to Tom Sawyer Island and enjoy a unique view of Fort Wilderness, native settlements along the riverbank, and various animal figures by the water's edge. The Mark Twain riverboat, the keelboats, and the canoes all sailed on a loop around the river, and also gave riders a look at Tom Sawyer Island and the rest of Frontierland from a different angle. The burning settler's cabin was an exciting climax for all of these trips around the river, a unique little reward for any visitor who rode the train or the riverboat, or who got there under their own steam in the canoes.
Now we're heading into the true backwoods. Watch for Indians and wild animals near the water's edge. This is the American West as it was a century ago. Our forefathers who tamed this great wilderness faced constant danger, and there across the river is proof. A settler's cabin afire. The old pioneer lies nearby, the victim of an Indian arrow.
Initially, the cabin was clearly visible from the river as the trees were sparse. Bob Matty, who had created the giant squid for Disney's 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea film, was a special effects artist who had been tasked with building the cabin. It was made of asbestos, concrete, and steel, all shaped to look like wooden logs with a stone chimney. The cabin had a small lean-to on the side and a broken-down fence surrounding it. The fire was real, piped out of the windows, doors, and roof using gas jets to create a striking scene. In front of the cabin lay the body of the old pioneer, with an oversized arrow sticking out of him. The figure had originally been a scarecrow-like dummy, which had quickly deteriorated as it was exposed to the elements. A year after the opening of Tom Sawyer Island, in 1957, the scarecrow body was replaced with a more durable dummy. This new figure was made by the Disneyland staff shop, and plaster tender Ed Winger volunteered to be the mold for the new pioneer. He lay face down as a plaster cast was made of his body, breathing through straws as the plaster heated up and hardened around him. The mold was then used to make a fiberglass body, which was dressed and placed in front of the cabin. It is absolutely wild that Disney had a fake corpse sitting out in front of one of their attractions, with clear signs of violence and bloodshed. Frontierland might have represented an idealized version of the American West, but Walt did seem to be willing to make a nod towards the hard facts that had formed America. But we must ask ourselves, what exactly were these hard facts? Across the river from the burning cabin was another Native American settlement, this one helpfully labelled on the Disneyland souvenir maps as Friendly Indians. A moving figure of a nearby chief waves to passing riverboats, and the Indian war canoes are led by friendly Indian guides.
We're now passing a village of friendly Indians. Fur trappers traveling the river in keelboats often stop here to barter for pelts and other valuable goods.
All of this is in stark contrast to the Native American settlement on Tom Sawyer Island, which the 1957 brochure called Hostile Indians on the Warpath, with the burning settlers' cabin being mute evidence of a treacherous attack. Walt recognized that Native American people were an integral part of the history of the frontier, so he provided a place for them in his version of the West. It's a child's game of cowboys and Indians, played out on a huge scale. Historian and geographer Richard Francaviglia notes that although Disney's original Frontierland is idealized, it is not whitewashed, writing that, reminiscent of the way in which cartographers depicted Apaches here and Comanches there, Disney provided a place for ethnicity. That these ethnic people lived in separate communities is telling, for it mirrors the racial segregation that only became illegal at about the same time, 1954, that Disney's theme park opened. Although there was some representation, the Native American figures depicted along the rivers of America were a vague amalgamation of Blackfoot, Cheyenne, Arapaho, and other Great Plains tribes. Another attraction, the Indian Village, was a mishmash of teepees, plank houses, and totem poles, with a promotional article listing the 16 different tribes that performed dances and crafts there. There was little cultural specificity, even if there was recognition of the unique traditions of specific indigenous nations.
No Frontierland would be complete without Indians, all real Indians, member of the Drum and Feather Club. Members of 16 different Indian tribes are here every day in Disneyland.
Scenes like the burning settlers' cabin provided a framework for Native people to exist within, and played into stereotypical and essentialist ideas about Indigenous people that had been refined through decades of dehumanizing depictions in dime novels and Western films. Historians Karen R. Jones and John Wills write that Indians became hungry wolves and devils of the forest, a blend of extant religious, ethnic, and environmental chauvinism filtered through the frontier experience. Such racialized codes incubated among settlers the notion of Indians as bloodthirsty and primitive, aberrant in their social practices, and uniformly warlike. This essentialism is rooted in historical rhetoric that allowed political policy and frontier justice to nearly eradicate Indigenous people across the American continent. Now, although Disneyland didn't uniformly depict Indigenous people as dangerous and warlike, the counter-narrative of the noble savage who is doomed to extinction also served to justify the genocide of Native Americans. Disney's Native Americans are kept in a sort of historical stasis, sitting in a liminal space between their pre-colonial society and their eventual subjugation by the United States government. The friendly Indians might be guiding you in a canoe along the rivers of America and waving as the paddleboat goes by now, but their time is up, and the good white man is here to tame frontier America as it developed from wilderness trails to roads, riverboats, railroads, and civilization. The burning settlers' cabin is a nod to the resistance encountered by those pioneers, but it also gives weight to the importance of the colonizers' task. Stories about Native American attacks on settler homesteads have been used to justify violent retaliation and racist political policy. Historian F. Evan New has talked about this in relation to attacks on settlers by Seminole and Muskogee Creek people in the American South. Perpetuated by settler families throughout the long 19th century, the recirculating stories of settler victimization contributed to the erasure of colonizing complexities, native identities and ethnicities, and the historic claims of native southerners to the region. Within settler families, reminiscers venerated ancestors who endured native violence and celebrated those who attained retribution. The hard facts that Walt alludes to were not necessarily the genocide of Indigenous people, but the violent struggles white colonizers had to overcome. Of course, there is one other reason why Native Americans feature so heavily in Disney's original Frontierland. The cultural juggernaut that was Davy Crockett. I think we need like a part 1.5 here or something. Okay, right. Okay. Whomst is Davy Crockett? Davy Crockett was a hugely successful character based on the real-life historical figure of David Crockett, a frontiersman and a member of the US House of Representatives for Tennessee. After his death at the Battle of the Alamo in 1836, exaggerated stories of his adventures made him into an American folk hero for a while. To promote the opening of Disneyland on the Disneyland television show, Walt decided to adopt the stories of famous folk heroes to represent the Frontierland section of the park. Davy Crockett was the first hero to be chosen, and the relatively unknown 8-foot-tall actor Fess Parker was chosen to portray him. Disney's Davy Crockett miniseries initially had 3 episodes: Davy Crockett Indian Fighter, Davy Crockett Goes to Congress, and Davy Crockett at the Alamo. The first episode aired on December 15th, 1954, and it was the first episode of the Disneyland show themed to the Frontierland section of the park. Davy Crockett is introduced as a stubborn yet lovable family man who volunteers to fight in the Creek War under General Andrew Jackson. The show is extremely light on historical context. An opening animation shows a Native American arrow striking and burning a settler fort, with the implication being that the heroic Davy is fighting the bad Indians who have taken to attacking settlers and the military. The Muskogee warriors are every cliché of bloodthirsty, savage Indians, and the big battle set piece in the middle of the episode shows them being killed by Davy and his friends with a sort of childlike enthusiasm. The episode ends with Davy hunting down the last defiant Muskogee chief and dueling him in hand-to-hand combat. Though he wins, Davy spares his life on the condition that he signs the peace treaty along with all the other chiefs. Davy has done his heroic duty, he rides off home to his family, a happy ending. In real life, the Creek War was a messy fight between opposing native tribes, religious prophets, the British, the Spanish, and the United States. It ended with Creek tribes giving up 23 million acres of their land with the signing of the Treaty of Fort Jackson, and General Andrew Jackson becoming enough of a national hero to run for president. Speaking of Congress, the second episode of the show saw our plucky hero becoming a member of the Tennessee General Assembly. Although it aired only a month after the first episode, this story has a more nuanced take on native and settler relations. Davy travels west to find new land to settle his family on, and he starts building a new cabin.
We ain't filed claim on this land yet. You mean you can't just take the parcel you want?
After staking a claim on the land, he learns that his new neighbor, a Cherokee farmer and his family, have been forced off their land so it can be resold to white settlers for a profit. Davy's kind heart leads him to help the Cherokee family, and he takes up the offer of local magistrate and arrests the corrupt settlers after a fistfight. His simple country charm helps him win the state legislature, and he makes it all the way to Washington. General Andrew Jackson from the previous episode is now President Andrew Jackson, and Davy becomes suspicious of his expansionist objectives. The dramatic finale of the episode sees Davy galloping across the country to stop Jackson's secret reverse sneak attack Indian removal bill. Arriving in the nick of time, Davy strides into Congress in his buckskins and makes an impassioned speech about the rights of all Americans to own their land and for government treaties with Native people to be upheld. He heroically tears the bill in half, and everybody claps like it's a 2012 Tumblr post. Back in reality, the bill was passed. President Andrew Jackson's Indian Removal Act of 1830 saw the forced displacement and deaths of tens of thousands of Native people, and the debate over the sovereignty of Indigenous nations has had far-reaching consequences that still impact America today. Although Davy Crockett Goes to Congress rose above the savage warrior stereotypes of Davy Crockett Indian Fighter, it still has a painfully optimistic view of American history. Good people uphold treaties, bad people break them. What those treaties mean and why they existed in the first place isn't mentioned. The show dipped its toe into questions of land rights and the treatment of Native people, but it was unwilling to follow those questions through to their historical answers. Heck, it wouldn't even follow through on Davy's own death. He's shown heroically fending off hordes of Mexican soldiers at the Alamo in a glorious last stand, before the scene just fades to a shot of the Texan flag. Don't worry though, Davy Crockett will return in Davy Crockett and the River Pirates, out in theaters July 18th, see it now in amazing Technicolor. I bring up Davy Crockett because it quite literally laid the groundwork for Frontierland. Davy and his buddy George were featured in the grand opening of Frontierland in the ABC television special. The show's ideas about good Indians and bad Indians and where exactly one should build their settler's cabin informed the layout of the theme park. You see, if the bad settler hadn't broken the terms of the treaty by building his cabin on the wrong bit of land, the bad Indians wouldn't have needed to burn it down now, would they? Disneyland's Frontierland doesn't reflect the hard facts of history. The hard facts were nothing but window dressing to give a more serious air of education to the adventure stories. What it does reflect are the values of 1950s conservative middle-class white America. Visitors are invited into an interactive version of the Old West, represented by stereotypical symbols and objects they're familiar with, including the eternally burning settler's cabin. As Karen R. Jones and John Wills argue in The American West: Competing Visions, thanks to earlier fictions, visitors knew how to behave, where to look, and what to laugh at in the Disney West. No additional education or preparation was necessary for full enjoyment of the experience. Hence, the discovery of Frontierland by each intrepid visitor was more a case of gazing at Disney-fied sculptures of the known rather than the unknown. Familiarity and predictability ensured customer satisfaction. Now, the idea that Frontierland is a fake representation of the Wild West is like the least groundbreaking take ever. God, I hope you don't come to me for hot takes. But if you look closer, there are nuances in the particular elements that Disney chose to recreate. Stock images from decades of dime novels and television shows and B-movies all make up Frontierland. Walt Disney never cared much for historical facts, and he was more comfortable creating a fictionalized folktale version of the past that promoted American values he wanted to see more of. It was never about it being correct, it was about it feeling correct.
Davy Crockett, king of the wild frontier.
Take the chance, each little Indian, twist your gal to the Buffalo Roundup.
The cabin continued to burn throughout the 1950s and 60s. The foliage on Tom Sawyer Island grew denser as the years passed, and the bright orange flames of the cabin stood out among the lush green trees. Outside of the park, America was also changing. The same year that the burning settler's cabin debuted, the Eisenhower administration passed the Indian Relocation Act. The government's aim was to force tribes to assimilate through subsidized relocation to urban areas for training and employment. This was part of a decades-long campaign to strip indigenous tribes of their sovereignty, sell their land, and dismantle any federal involvement with Native Americans. These policies were colloquially known as Indian termination.
You mean you can't just take the parcel you want?
After being relocated to cities, a lack of support led to many indigenous people becoming stuck in urban slums. However, this relocation also allowed for pan-tribal activist groups to form. The American Indian Movement was founded in 1968 in Minneapolis. A year later, the Indians of All Tribes group staged a sit-in at the former state penitentiary of Alcatraz. The group campaigned to have Alcatraz, which had been classified as surplus land by the federal government, handed over to Native Americans. The occupation lasted 19 months and had the support of prominent celebrities and the general public after a lot of media coverage. These new activist groups brought the plight of Native Americans to the forefront of national news. Meanwhile, the counterculture movements of the late 1960s and early 1970s complemented and amplified Indigenous activism. Native people's fight for their sovereignty ran alongside the civil rights movement and opposition to the Vietnam War. Anything vaguely spiritual and exotic was in. Jimi Hendrix wore moccasins on stage. Native imagery was used in everything from anti-pollution adverts to romance novel covers. This groundswell of support led to the Trail of Broken Treaties. This march saw a caravan of over 700 activists from 200 different tribes marching from California to Washington, D.C. in 1972. They demanded that the Nixon administration recognize and uphold historic treaties made with tribes that had been broken over the decades, that the government restored stolen land, and that federal tribal relations were reformed. Although Nixon ultimately dismissed the protesters' manifesto, he did eventually sign into law many pieces of legislation that allowed for indigenous sovereignty. A year later, in 1973, 200 Oglala Lakota and American Indian Movement protesters occupied the settlement of Wounded Knee in South Dakota. Protesting the failed impeachment of their tribal president and the US government's history of not honoring treaties, the occupation lasted 71 tense days. Shootouts with federal marshals resulted in the death of 2 protesters before an agreement was eventually reached. All of this media attention culminated in Sacheen Littlefeather's speech at the 1973 Academy Awards. Speaking on behalf of the absentee Marlon Brando, who had just won Best Actor for The Godfather, Littlefeather rejected the award. Brando cited the film industry's treatment of and depiction of Native Americans and the ongoing standoff at Wounded Knee as his reasons for declining. With the blame for the suffering of Indigenous people very publicly laid at the feet of the entertainment industry, Disney's Frontierland was starting to look a little suspect. After Walt's death in 1966, the Disney company struggled. Their animated features did not see the same success as previous films, and their animation department was slowly downsized. Multiple changes in leadership also left the company without a strong vision. While they struggled to find their place in a rapidly changing America, Disney was also at risk of having their reassuring and wholesome image chipped away by a potential controversy. A 1967 edition of the Disneyland News magazine assured readers that Frontierland's Indian Village was a tasteful edutainment attraction. The article states that, with the permission of their tribal councils and, in some cases, the US Bureau of Indian Affairs, they perform ancient tribal dances for 1.5 million visitors each year, and that the goal of the performers was to erase a long-held impression here and abroad that all Indians are war-whooping savages capable of little else than galloping across television and movie screens. Please pay no attention to the hostile Indian camp across the river from them. Despite all of this, Walt Disney World got its own burning settlers cabin a few years later.
Meeting of the rivers of America lies the small bit of land known as Tom Sawyer Island. Visitors here must arrive on rustic rafts. Sure, they find many fascinating spots right out of Mark Twain's famous story.
Disney World's Rivers of America was nearly identical to Disneyland's in California, and its own version of Tom Sawyer Island opened in 1973, complete with a burning cabin in Indian Territory. Perhaps Disney thought that the target audience of East Coast families and overseas tourists would be less put off by what the cabin represented, with the American West feeling like a distant and romantic place. Meanwhile, over in the real West, Disneyland was making some changes to their Frontierland attractions. In 1972, the Indian Village was replaced by Bear Country and the popular Country Bear Jamboree animatronic show. The Indian War Canoes were renamed to Davy Crockett's Explorer Canoes, but the settlement of Good Indians and the Waving Chief on a Horse remained. For the celebration of America's bicentennial in 1976, the narration on the Disneyland Railroad was updated. The Frontierland section spends most of its time promoting the Country Bear Jamboree, and the section on the burning cabin omits any references to Native Americans.
This is the American West as it was a century ago. Our forefathers who tamed this great wilderness faced the challenge of clearing the new land. And there, across the river, a settler's cabin afire.
The rising cost of fuel after the 1973 oil crisis prompted Disney to turn off the fire effect sometime in the late 1970s. The Pioneer now lay dead in front of a blackened cabin in the silence of the forest. Without the spectacular flames and the references to hostile Indians on the warpath, the cabin no longer resembled the iconography from dime novels and old westerns. By the 1980s, the fire had been turned back on, but the cabin's backstory had now been changed entirely.
Life out here on the frontier was filled with challenges and hardships. The early settlers not only had to battle nature to survive, they also had to contend with river pirates and other outlaws. There across the river is proof. A settler's cabin is on fire.
The early settler had now been killed by river pirates, and wait, what's a river pirate? A river pirate is a pirate who operates along a river. I guess I could have figured that out for myself. In 1984, fake flames similar to the ones used in the finale of Pirates of the Caribbean were added to try and simulate fire, but the effect was unconvincing and hard to see from a distance. The cabin's backstory changed yet again sometime in the late 1980s. The old pioneer was now a moonshiner who got too drunk and passed out and accidentally set his cabin on fire in the process. By the time the 1990s rolled around, Disney decided to, you guessed it, change the backstory of the cabin once again. The drunk moonshiner was removed, and a fake tree with an eagle nest was added outside of the cabin.
We're now traveling along the banks of the rivers of America into the true backwoods. This wilderness is filled with beauty, but it has its dangers too. Why, there across the river is proof. A settler's cabin is on fire.
All right. Okay, I guess we're just leaving it there, I guess. The settler was now an idiot who had set his own cabin alight for unspecified reasons and was threatening an endangered eagle species. It's a very utopian scholastic pan flute moment for Disney. We were all about saving the rainforest and conservation in the 90s. We really thought we could change the world, okay? Eventually, the flames were permanently turned off. There are rumors as to why, ranging from the gas pipe to the island needing to be replaced to California's changing emissions standards. In 1995, Disney released Pocahontas. The film was part of a small wave of films that attempted to show a more grounded and sympathetic portrayal of Indigenous people. Films like 1990's Dances with Wolves and 1992's The Last of the Mohicans tried for a more realistic and diverse look at American history, even if it was through the lens of a white man. Oh, and we can't forget the ultimate horse girl film, 2002's Spirit, Stallion of the Cimarron, which was through the lens of a horse, I guess? Get off of my back! Against this backdrop of a more apologetic media landscape, Disneyland's charred little cabin sat empty, begging you not to notice it. By the new millennium, the cabin was no longer a settler's cabin in the backwoods of the frontier. Tom Sawyer Island closed on the 5th of February 2007, and it underwent a major renovation and retheme. Inspired by the section of The Adventures of Tom Sawyer where Tom and Huck run away to Jackson Island to be pirates, oh, who are we kidding? It was to help promote the third Pirates of the Caribbean film that came out that year. The island was renamed to the rather clunky Pirate's Lair on Tom Sawyer Island. Most of the references to the Sawyer Huckleberry Extended Universe were removed in favor of props and characters from the Pirates of the Caribbean film franchise, including everyone's favorite skeleton ball. Fort Wilderness was removed after decades of neglect and termite damage. The inaccessible area to the north of the island is now just uncharted lands. The settler's cabin was fixed up and redecorated to look like an idyllic little house. They're living in harmony with the pirates, I guess. The pirate theme is much more whimsical and less racially charged than the cowboys and Indians narrative of the island's previous iteration, although, as we have previously learned, pirates did in fact exist. During an extensive refurbishment of the Rivers of America in 2010, the cabin became occupied by Mike Fink and his keelboat from the Davy Crockett series, with a sign out the front advertising Mr. Fink's trade in traps.
And the settler's cabin has a new resident. Mike Fink from Disney's Davy Crockett television movies reportedly has moved into the cabin. That's his keelboat docked nearby.
6 years later, the Rivers of America saw a massive remodeling in 2016 as part of the construction of a new Star Wars-themed land to the northwest of Frontierland. The northern portion of the river's loop was shortened, and almost a third of Pirate's Lair on Tom Sawyer Island was lost to accommodate the new route. This piece of land was where the hostile Indian tribes and the settlers' cabin was located. The original cabin was destroyed, and Mike Fink moved into a shiny new cabin on the northern edge of the remodeled river loop. Although the friendly Indian village on the far banks of the river remained, there were no more hostile Indians, no more river pirates, no more moonshiners, just the suspiciously empty frontier.
As we steam past Hungry Bear Restaurant, the last outpost in these parts, we're now joining up with the rivers of America and entering the frontier as it looked more than a century and a half ago. This is my favorite part of the journey. Around every bend, there's natural beauty as far as the eye can see.
While Disneyland's cabin was bouncing between different identities every decade, Walt Disney World Settlers Cabin continued to burn at a steady pace as the result of an Indian attack. However, when the Liberty Bell riverboat went down for an extended refurbishment in 2005, the flames were turned off as the cabin wouldn't really be visible to visitors. Even after the Liberty Bell's refurbishment was finished, the flames were never turned back on, and the cabin slowly became overgrown and dilapidated from neglect. In 2024, Disney announced that they would be making the terrible mistake of removing Walt Disney World's Rivers of America and Tom Sawyer Island entirely, and replacing it with a ride set in the world of the 2014 animated film Planes, Fire, and Rescue. In July 2025, the Rivers of America and Tom Sawyer Island closed permanently, and the no longer burning Settlers Cabin was demolished. The burning Settlers Cabin was a piece of iconography with a long and bitter history, but it was also a sincere attempt on the part of Walt Disney to make space for the hard facts that built America, as misguided and stereotyped as those attempts were. I applaud Disney for not wanting to profit from a legacy of human suffering, but removing references to Native Americans has kind of made modern-day Frontierland less diverse than it originally was. As Jones and Wills note in American West, by eliminating all references to Indians in the hope of avoiding controversy, Disney Imagineers only reinforced the sense of the Western frontier as a white endeavor. Keeping Frontierland free from anything that could raise uncomfortable questions left the area full of cabins that spontaneously caught fire of their own accord, and a big, empty wilderness that contains more fake animals than it does indigenous people.
This is my favorite part of the journey. Around every bend, there's natural beauty as far as the eye can see.
Michael Steiner was a professor of American Studies at California State University, and he's written extensively about American and Californian identity and the idea of the West. He highlights the multicultural nature of early Frontierland, with African-American Aunt Jemima running her kitchen, Zorro and El Fuego Baco appearing as characters, the Mexican trading post and the mariachi band playing at El Zocalo, and the Indian village staffed by Native Americans sharing their tribe's culture. As the years went on, though, Disney decided that, rather than confront these painful impediments to the wonders of westward movement, it was much easier, more pleasing, and consistent with Disney's utopianism to simply erase them from the script. But we must also remember that the roles given to these non-white characters were based on dehumanizing stereotypes that had developed through decades of racist portrayals in films, magazines, novels, and songs. The majority white audience of Disneyland's early days did not want to question the moral goodness of America's westward expansion, and they did not want to be cast as the violent oppressors.
You mean you can't just take the parcel you want?
No, Davy, no. Walt's hard facts were intended to serve the dominant narrative of American optimism overcoming adversity in the wilderness, not to bring to light decades of systemic violence against indigenous people. Disney was never going to answer the uncomfortable questions these hard facts would raise, so they simply erased them. Much like the empty Pueblo cliff dwellings in the Grand Canyon diorama, Native people became absent ghosts, confined to the margins of their own country's history. America's idea of what the frontier looked like has changed in the 75 years since Disneyland opened. The past will always be reconstructed through the lens of the present, And as the idea of the present has changed, so has Disneyland. Representations of historical events and locations in theme parks are important, as they're part of how a culture forms a sense of identity through play. As Native American essayist Elizabeth Cook Lynn wrote, popular culture is important not because it says something real about history, but because it says something significant about the popular culture concerning Indians in this country. It is important because it tells us that America still cannot abide any real disruptive implications about the history it shares with Indians. That America, in its popular imagination, still wants the simple solutions to the massive racial issues brought about by its own imperialistic origins. Hollywood continues to reduce racism to a conflict between two individuals, and then neatly resolving those characters' personal conflicts to sidestep any discussion of systemic issues. See, it's not a genocide, it's just one bad settler and some hostile Indians. And I get it, I really do. I don't want to think about any of this. I just want to ride Big Thunder Mountain 5 times in a row. I adore Frontierland. It's my favorite section of any castle park, and I spend a lot of time there when I visit. But at the same time, I'm so aware of the history of the place and what it's all referencing. Making this video is like picking at a scab. Compelling, painful, and probably something that should have been done in private. If you only take one thing away from this video, it's that asking if the changes to the Burning Settlers cabin were politically correct or not is missing the point. The cabin's original storyline was based on hundreds of years of racist stereotypes of Indigenous people, but the removal of the cabin erases the painful realities of America's colonization and does whitewash Frontierland a bit. It is a double-edged sword, but one half of the equation has caused much deeper wounds. Changes to things like the settlers' cabin happen because America's view of itself continues to change, and theme parks are one of the ways in which that national identity is explored and experienced. What stories a theme park chooses to tell and how it tells them can tell us so much about the time and the place and the people that made those attractions. With that in mind, it's no surprise that Tokyo Disneyland's Rivers of America still has a burning settlers cabin. Like the original in California, it is inaccessible, sitting on the shore of the northernmost part of Tom Sawyer Island. There is no body of a settler outside, and I don't think there ever has been. The fire is fake. The cabin has smoke coming out of the roof and a fake fire in the windows to achieve the burning effect. An improvement, I think, on the fake fire used in Disneyland in the 1980s. As I said at the beginning, the burning settlers cabin haunts me. It maintains its mystique for a few reasons, I think. It was inaccessible for its entire existence, visible only in brief glimpses from the train or the paddle boat, or while you tried not to die of exhaustion in the canoes. It encouraged the viewer to think beyond the marked confines of the park, expanding the possibility space outward and conjuring up, for a very brief moment, a living, breathing world within Frontierland that continued to exist even when you weren't looking at it. The use of real fire and a fake corpse adds a sense of danger to what is otherwise a very tightly controlled environment. It is an excellent piece of theme park architecture, a flourish that deepens the visitor's experience and adds depth to the park's made-up land. I genuinely love it. But that little cabin also burns questions into the mind of the viewer, questions which have a much darker subject matter than would be discussed at a Disney theme park. It's a little bit of grit which lends a sense of depth to the experience. There's something about it that even feels taboo. In 5 years' time, it will be the 250th anniversary of the last Indian raid in New England. I don't know if the town of Bethel in Maine will still hold a celebration commemorating the raid, or if they'll have a burning settlers cabin. We will have to wait and see.
Comb your hair and paint and powder. You act proud and I'll act prouder. You sing loud and I'll sing louder. Tonight we're setting the woods on fire. You're my gal and I'm your feller. Dress up in your frock of yeller. I'll look swell, but you look sweller. Setting the woods on fire. We'll take it all.
Do you want another video to watch while you eat? Come with me as I explore Australia's animatronic Wild West. I spent my summer holidays finding out what happens when an ex-insurance broker tries to make his own Disneyland attraction in a rural Australian town. This full-length video is available exclusively for all my wonderful patrons. Patreon members also get director's commentary posts for each of my YouTube videos, including this one, and access to new videos a week early. You can check out a free preview of Australia's animatronic Wild West over on my Patreon page. The link is in the description. Thank you all for watching.